Hello, and welcome to Knights of the Nerds Table. My name is Dietr, and this is Dietr Knows, the segment where I do a deep dive into pop culture trivia. Today, I want to ask you a question. Do you know who is responsible for the portrayal of Black Panther as we know him today in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Well, Dietr knows, so subscribe, and let's learn about the man behind the King of Wakanda, a one Christopher J. Priest. Christopher Priest, whose given name was James Christopher Owsley, was originally born in 1961 in the Hollis neighborhood of Queens, New York. By his own admission, Priest grew up in a lower-class neighborhood that tended to be a bit of a dangerous environment for him. From a 2018 interview with Vulture, Priest described it as such. "It was a fairly hostile environment. I got beat up a lot in that environment. I was mugged in that environment. I had guns pointed at me in anger in that environment." As is often the case for young people in this situation, Priest would find solace in the escapist world of Marvel's superhero comics. At the time, Marvel was a young, upstart company that had established itself as the countercultural, mature alternative to DC's more kid-friendly line of comics. So it's no surprise that by 1978, an ambitious young Christopher Priest had secured an internship at the Marvel offices, and within a year had been brought on full-time as an assistant editor under Paul Lakin, working on a satirical periodical Marvel was publishing at the time by the name of Crazy Magazine. Priest would then go on to work under future Wolverine writer Larry Hama on Marvel's Conan the Barbarian comics. At the time, Priest also began to develop his writing skills, with his first writing credit being the 4-issue Falcon miniseries released in 1983. Less than a year later, Priest would secure his place in comics history, and not for the last time. See, all of Priest's hard work had come to the attention of Marvel's editor-in-chief, Jim Shooter, who I can only assume must have seen some of himself in Priest. Like Priest, Shooter was dedicated to the business of comics, and broke in as an editor at an absurdly early age. His first story was published by DC Comics when he was only 13. Shooter described Christopher Priest as such. "He was crazy, high energy, and did everything you could ever ask of him. He started to wear roller skates so he could go back and forth on the floor. He was a really great kid and loved being there with all these creative people." And so, in 1984, at the age of 22, Christopher Priest was promoted to a full editorial position, and in doing so, became the first black man to hold such a role at one of the big two comic companies. And this was not just an editorial role on some unknown title. No, Priest was put in charge of Marvel's flagship title, The Amazing Spider-Man. So, for those who aren't familiar with the position, comic editors are more than just proofreaders. They are essentially the glue that holds a comic company like Marvel or DC together. Editors manage deadlines, plots, they act as go-betweens for the creative team, both on their books and books elsewhere in the office, and they correct plot errors and more. Basically, the editor is the one who makes sure that the final product is everything it can be. It's a lot for anyone to handle, let alone a single 22-year-old. And Priest's time as Spider-Man editor was rocky, as Jim Shooter explains. He's obviously a smart guy, but just had no interest in bureaucracy, and wasn't dealing real well with getting people to work on time and keeping a schedule and all that stuff. Priest's management style was not appreciated by his writers, particularly Spider-Man writer Tom DeFalco, and the tensions between the two started to leak out onto the page, with the ongoing story in the comics at the time about Spider-Man villain Hobgoblin being radically altered last minute due to DeFalco allegedly being unwilling to share the true identity of the mystery villain with Priest. For more details about that story and everything that happened in the background, I highly recommend checking out Comic Trope's excellent YouTube video on the subject. In a later issue, DeFalco introduced a character named Aloysius Jamesley, a thin parody of Priest who was an architect with delusions of grandeur. Management aside, though, there was another reason that Priest had trouble finding success as an editor. Allegedly, some white Marvel staffers believed that Priest was coordinating some sort of African American conspiracy within the office in order to elevate other black creators beyond what they had earned through merit. To his credit, Priest responded the only way he knew how, with a scathing document that he referred to as the Marvel White Supremacy Memo. Within the document, he listed all of the black creators he had ever worked with and detailed in no uncertain terms the reasons why they unequivocally deserved their positions. It's unclear what was the last straw for Jim Shooter, but the fact remains that the tension in the office had become unbearable, and as a result, Jim Shooter removed Priest from his editorial position, something that Priest reportedly thanked him for. This isn't surprising, since Priest described this as a terribly unhappy time in his life, both professionally and personally. It wasn't long after this that Priest would go on to jump ship over to DC, where he would remain for the next 10 years, writing and editing for titles such as Green Lantern and Steel. He also created Quantum and Woody for Acclaimed Comics in 1997. It would seem that, after that, 10 years was enough time to heal wounds, because in 1998, Priest was approached by then Marvel editor Joe Quesada to begin writing a brand new volume of Black Panther, which would be published under Marvel's Marvel Knights line. Reportedly, Priest was not thrilled with the offer. As he explains, "I was a little horrified when the words Black and Panther came out of Joe's mouth. I mean, Black Panther? Who reads Black Panther? Black Panther?" Priest's reticence largely came from his impression that he was being offered the job largely on account of race. The way Priest saw it, Black Panther was a black character, and so Marvel was offering him, a black writer, the job so that he could create what he called a black book. As Priest describes it, "I stopped being a writer, or being thought of as a writer, and started being thought of as a black writer." As a result, Priest deliberately began his run by setting up his story through the eyes of a white protagonist. Priest felt that the best way to reintroduce audiences to his reinvented Wakandan monarch was through the eyes of a fish-out-of-water audience surrogate. As he explains, "I realized I could use Ross to bridge the gap between the African culture that the Black Panther mythos is steeped in, and the predominantly white readership that Marvel sells to. And so, the character of Everett K. Ross was created, and Christopher Priest's Black Panther run began." Priest's Black Panther never forgets that T'Challa is, first and foremost, a king, whose only priority is his people and his nation. The T'Challa that we meet is regal, proud, and cunning enough to con even Marvel's very own devil, Mephisto. The framing device of seeing everything through Ross's perspective is invaluable to the story, making T'Challa look amazing while also injecting an everyman humor to lighten the story. Priest also makes sure to spend a lot of time interrogating the way that a post-colonial world would interact with a completely independent African nation. The majority of Priest's Black Panther stories involve T'Challa dealing with foreign powers and their attempts to gain some measure of control over Wakanda in the way that they had previously controlled other parts of the African continent. Priest's run also introduces the Dora Milaje, familiar to moviegoers as the Wakandan Royal Guards. Both Okoye and Nakia make their debuts in this role, although fans of Lupita Nyong'o's Nakia might find the comic version of Nakia to be alien to them. In this story, she becomes an obsessed supervillain named Malice after T'Challa kisses her, and she falls in unrequited love with him. In fact, the entire backstory of the Dora Milaje in Priest's run would be a bit difficult for moviegoers to adjust to. See, in the comics, the Dora Milaje act as representatives of various tribes united under Wakandan rule. They are both bodyguards and wives-to-be, recruited as teenagers and promised to the King of Wakanda. It's a tradition that is met with derision by some of the American characters in the story, and a modern audience might find it a skosh distasteful. Nevertheless, Priest's run over the first 49 issues is superlative, deftly combining humor, action, and political commentary, with the story being paired with moody, atmospheric art. On the 50th issue, Priest would take a hard left turn, introducing biracial narcotics detective Casper Cole, who would go on to become the Black Panther for the final 13 issues of his run. I'll be honest, the final 13 issues are hit or miss for me. After spending so much time immersed in Wakandan society at the side of King T'Challa, to all of a sudden be moved into a story set in New York, with T'Challa largely as an ancillary character, it's just a bit much to swallow when it's coming off the heels of such an exciting run. During this same time frame, Priest would also take over writing duties on everyone's favorite Merc with a Mouth, Deadpool. And it's interesting to note that while writer Joe Kelly was the first writer to have Deadpool break the fourth wall, Priest is largely credited with codifying Deadpool's fourth wall breaking tick as a regular character trait. So, not only is he the writer responsible for the Black Panther you all know and love, he's really kind of responsible for the Deadpool that you all know and love as well. After wrapping up his writing duties on Black Panther, Priest would go on to write a 14-issue run on Captain America and the Falcon, before leaving the comics business for a full decade. As he said, "What's the point? Everything I do gets canceled, and I'm never going to be put on a top-tier book." Despite his superlative writing chops, Priest was never being given the top-tier characters that his writing deserved. But this story doesn't end badly. Priest spent his time away from the business pursuing other passions, making music and becoming an ordained Baptist minister. And what's better is, in 2014, Priest came back, first revisiting his independent creation Quantum and Woody, before returning to the big two with books like Deathstroke, Inhumans, Justice League, and most recently, an ongoing run on DC's Black Adam. Christopher Priest is a unique voice in comics, and responsible for what you love a lot about characters like Black Panther and Deadpool. If you pick up a book with his name on it, I guarantee you will get a clever story with sharp wit and unflinching commentary. So do yourself a favor. Grab his books from your local library, your local comic shop, or on Marvel Unlimited or DC Universe Infinite. And then step back here for more conversation with the Knights of the Nerds table. In the meantime, this has been Dietr Knows, and now you know too. Thank you for watching.